My name is Denarii Grace. 2 seconds about me. I am a blues singer-songwriter. I'm a poet, screenwriter, freelance writer and editor. I'm actually one of the nonfiction editors at the Deaf Poets Society for deaf and disabled folks, the online journal of art and literature. And I am, obviously, an educator and activist. And I'm from New York. I've been told that you guys won't hold it against me, so so yes, this is me. I just want to welcome you to this space. This is my 3rd time doing this workshop within the last year. This workshop is usually about an hour, hour and a half long. As I'm sure other presenters have told you, this is super condensed. I will try my best to go through everything. It's kind of a very 101 workshop, so there's a lot to cover for most people who don't have background in fat liberation, fat studies and stuff like that, which is why I'm gonna stop talking. And so before I go into the first activity, because I am gonna try as best as I can to do some activities under the circumstances, so you're not just sitting there listening to me talk. But before I do that, I just want to kind of quickly go over some term usage. You will notice, whether you're talking to me in the hallway or wherever, that I generally don't use the terms X-phobia, like fat phobia, homophobia, biphobia, that kind of stuff. I'm a person with an actual phobia, which I do not discuss most of the time because that is very triggering for me in and of itself. But because of the kind of the ableist underlining background of the terms X-phobia, you will usually hear me use the terms fat antagonism, X-antagonism, fat antagonism, Muslim antagonism, et cetera, unless I'm in a space where you know, I don't want to make assumptions about people's knowledge levels, and so occasionally you'll hear me use X-phobia just because those are the terms people are more familiar with and understand, but generally I don't use that term for ableist reasons. I also, as I've already demonstrated, you'll notice I use the word fat to describe myself and others accordingly as they so choose to identify. I don't use the terms overweight and obese, generally speaking, because they're medical terms that help to perpetuate fat antagonism. And normally I would get a little bit into why that is, but we don't have time. So first I was like, oh yeah.
I'm sorry, I really want to understand. Could you please slow down your speech?
I'm sorry, yes, I can slow down.
I really want to hear what you have to say.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm sorry. I'm like, time. So the first thing that I want to do is ask how many of you are familiar with this game called Never Have I Ever? You can indicate in any way that makes sense for you. Okay, so we are going to play a quick game of Never Have I Ever, a little bit condensed for time purposes, obviously. And basically, for those who aren't familiar or may not be familiar, I will say a statement, never have I ever, blah, blah, blah. And then if you've never done that, then you raise your hand. If you have done that or experienced that or participated in that, then you don't raise your hand. Obviously, in this circumstance and in every circumstance, I tried to keep my presentations as accessible as possible. So if raising your hand or your arm isn't something you can do, you can indicate in whatever way makes sense for you or makes you comfortable. And so does anyone have any questions about the game before we get started? Need more explanation? No? Okay. So, first, never have I ever. Never have I ever dieted. If you've never dieted, raise your hand.
Oh, I'm like...
If you've never dieted, raise your hand. Never have I ever counted calories. You've never counted calories in your life. Never have I ever avoided or severely limited an entire substance, like carbs or sugar or fat, desserts, sweets, that kind of stuff, that wasn't for medical reasons, such as diabetes or food allergy, celiac disease, but instead with the intention of either losing weight or to avoid becoming fat. You've never excluded food groups or substances that didn't have anything to do with disability issues. Never have I ever made fun of a fat or larger body person who wasn't myself. So like if you made fun of other people that are fat or larger bodied, don't raise your hand. If you've never made fun of a fat person, then raise your hand. Sorry. If you've never made fun of a fat person or a larger body person, you can raise your hand. If you've never done it. Never have I ever had negative thoughts about my size, for those of you in the audience who are fat or larger bodied, whatever terms you prefer, or about my body for people of all sizes, based on society's standards of beauty. If you've never had any negative ideas about how you look, how you're shaped, your skin color, your hair, whatever, if you've never had those kind of thoughts, then you can raise your hand. Okay. Never have I ever deliberately skipped a meal. Never have I ever deliberately skipped a meal. Never have I ever refused to eat either after or before a certain time. Again, that doesn't have anything to do with medical issues. And finally, never have I ever expressed concern about the obesity epidemic. You've never said, oh, but what about health? Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much for participating. So before I go into the presentation, I want to ask y'all a couple of questions. First, how did that feel? And again, you can raise your hand or indicate in whatever way makes sense for you. You can call it out if you don't need a microphone. How did that feel for you to do that exercise? I see someone back there.
Really difficult.
Does anyone else want to respond?
I'd just like to echo that. I think that it's not the same in terms of how I responded for other people and how I responded for myself. So that was very evident.
And there's one.
It reminds me of how much time I've wasted focusing on these issues that I don't need to.
Anyone else? Oh, yes.
I think it really outlined the mistakes I've made in the past as far as judging others and judging myself.
Okay. And one more question for the audience before I move on to the presentation. Where do you think that the different ideas and thoughts and behaviors that I mentioned in the game come from, and why do you think they're so prevalent? There's two people over here. Okay.
Because people in positions of privilege don't realize their own privileges. They are often the ones that make societal expectations.
And then there's someone behind you?
This isn't like on a societal level, but just personally, I feel like a lot of the negative messages I have about my body come from my parents.
I'll take one more. Is anyone else? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
This is not my original idea, but I've heard it said, and I thought it was interesting that for a lot of people, food and eating has become a stand-in for sex. And therefore, somebody's eating habits or perceptions of their eating habits, whether that is or not, is used as a proxy for their virtue that might have either usually or in past times stood in for beliefs about their sexual activity.
Okay. Thank you so much. I don't know if I can. So the first thing I like to do normally is a visual exercise, but for time purposes, I'm going to cut that out. But I will kind of like go through the slides a little bit, just so you can get an idea of what the exercise was going to be. Essentially, I asked people to look at photos. The first time that I did this workshop, and I will be describing the photos in a moment for people who need it, but the first time I did this workshop last year, part of my research and putting the workshop together, I decided to Google images of fat people. Just put in fat people and then Google images search. And the results that I got were these first couple of pages. And what I usually do with this exercise is describe the photos for people who need them, and then ask people to essentially point out any patterns or anything that they notice about when you Google fat people, what is prevalent, what keeps coming up. And we know that the way Google works is that, when you search for things that are popular, you search for things that a lot of other people are searching about, you start typing something in and it'll finish it for you because that image or that idea is popular. And so the first couple of pages, there are a lot of pictures of very, very large people, so not what we would call small fats. They are often eating large amounts of food, usually not salads. Usually burgers and fries, those kinds of things. You can see that they're usually messy eaters. There's food all over their bodies, like this one up here at the top. This picture is actually really important to me because, and obviously trigger warning, it's a picture of a woman from England who was abused for being fat in public. She was on public transportation and was beaten up by another woman for taking up space. But most of the images are, like I said, are of people and cartoons. This is a set of cartoons who are eating. There's more food. There's a lot of images of like struggling to exercise or, being made fun of. And so this is what fat people, larger body people have to contend with every single day. And the reason why I call this presentation Queering Fat Acceptance is, one, because the first time I presented it, it was at a conference for bi+ people. I am bisexual and non-binary, and I wanted to talk about the intersections between fatness and queerness and transness and non-binariness. So I'm just going to read a little bit from here. You feel free to copy it down if you want, or take pictures, screenshots, whatever. So gay men are thought to only represent about 5% of the total male population, but among those who have eating disorders, 42% identify as gay. So 42% of men who have eating disorders are gay men. And I'm going to use that in quotes because we know bi+ erasure exists. Both males and females who identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or mostly heterosexual, they have it in quotes, have elevated rates of binge eating and purging by vomiting or laxative abuse than their heterosexual peers. Lesbian, bi, or mostly heterosexual people were about twice as likely to report binge eating at least once a month in the last year. Most of these studies are from the last few years. Elevated rates of binge eating and purging by vomiting or laxative abuse were found for both males and females who identified as gay, lesbian, bi, or mostly heterosexual in comparison to their straight peers. And a little bit more, respondents aged 18 to 19 were significantly more likely than those aged 30 to 59 to have subclinical bulimia. So this is something, as we know, that affects, tends to affect younger people, but it's something that you tend to carry, if you don't address these issues into your older age. So we say it's an issue for younger people, but unless we pass away, it's something that you carry in for your whole life. So it's something that affects people of all ages. Black and Latinx LGBT people have at least as high prevalence of eating disorders as white LGBs, because it's just talking about sexual orientation, right? There's this conception, again, that it's that eating disorders, disordered eating is a young, white, thin woman issue, but we are now starting to see that that is actually not the case. And trans youth specifically are 4 times more likely than their cis hetero female peers to report a diagnosed eating disorder, and twice as likely to report abusing weight loss pills and engaging in self-induced vomiting. So these issues really affect the queer community, the trans communities, the non-binary communities, two-spirit communities specifically. These are the issues that we're dealing with, in addition to the oppression that we face because of the oppression that we face. So a bit of history. So current ideas in the West about health and what a good body looks like, things like that, is only about 100 years old. And generally it's understood to have coincided with the advent of modern day agriculture and industrialization. So, as we continue to gain more and more access to food, lots of food, abundance of food, then what became less attainable, which were smaller bodies, is what the upper class decided was, okay, this is desirable, we're the ones in charge. As I believe someone said earlier, someone said earlier, the people who are in charge of society, who run society, are the ones who dictate what's desirable. And so once the thinness became desirable within the last 100 years or so, that's when things started to change. And it was often, health was often linked with morality. So a lot of the health foods that we know of today, like graham crackers and things like that, were actually invented by oftentimes religious figures, religious leaders, often, usually, pretty much always, white men, to curb what they considered sinful behavior, like masturbation. You're gonna eat this salad, you're gonna eat this graham cracker, and it's gonna make you not want to touch yourself. That was the idea, right? And so ideas about fat antagonism and, and healthism and ableism are also very, very linked with Christian privilege and dominance. And so then, people do not know this, but the actual fat liberation movement is actually about 50 or so years old. People look at like body positivity and Jessamine Stanley and all these awesome people and think that this is a very new development, but it's actually really old. It's not that old, obviously, but it's been around for a while. It's not a new idea. And it started, like I said, around the time that a lot of other political and social movements were happening. The civil rights movement for Black folks, the work like AIM for indigenous folks, women's rights, Stonewall and LGBTQ rights. All this stuff was going on at the same time that the fat liberation movement in the US started. And so back in '69, the same year as Stonewall, the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance, NAFA, was founded in New York by Bill Fabry, who I do not know personally, but he is friends with some of the fat activists that I do know. He's still alive and kicking, as is NAFA. And there was a protest staged in Central Park in Manhattan, a fat-in, similar to a sit-in, where protesters ate ice cream and burned pictures of Twiggy, who was a very famous, very, very thin, blonde, white model that was famous back in those days. So there are some other notes here, and I meant to say this earlier, but because I kind of have to go through this quickly, if anyone would want a full copy of the presentation emailed to you, feel free to let me know after this, and I can jot down your email, or you can take mine, and I can email you the Google Docs link to the presentation, which will have the full, because there's some slides that are missing too. So it would have, all of the old slides, the original slides and everything. Yes, so In 2003, the Association for Size, Diversity, and Health, ASDA, was founded, and they are really big proponents of health at every size, which is a really important movement and idea around health, looking at wellness as weight neutral, as opposed to the weight-centric, weight-focused health system that we have, healthcare system that we have today. So they're really awesome. And in 2010, Health at Every Size, The Surprising Truth About Your Weight, was published by Linda Bacon. I encourage everyone, if you can get that access, to find that book and check it out. So I'm going to quickly go through this. So there's some specific numbers. We know that, in a society that is where science and medical advancements are propelled and very tightly intertwined with capitalism and corporations, that a lot of studies around fatness that don't perpetuate fat is death and all that kind of stuff are really hard to find, but we have been lucky enough to have research within the last several years that has really outlined a lot of the nuance around body size and health and weight and wellness, so as well as discrimination. So fat or larger body people are just as likely to develop eating disorders as people who are thin, but diagnoses, if caught, are delayed by 9 months, usually, on average. And we know, in general, that eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of any mental disability. So there's depression, there's schizophrenia, there's all these different mental disabilities. And of all of those mental disabilities, eating disorders have the highest death rate. And yet, fat people are diagnosed later by almost a year. And this is due, of course, to bias and assumptions about how we eat, and what we do physically, and what we need to do in order to better ourselves. Weight loss, we know, is not sustainable for the overwhelming majority of people. Numbers kind of range on this, different studies, an 85 to 95% failure rate. For those who do lose weight, most, especially those of us who are larger fat bodies, mid and super fats, will remain fat, often regaining more than what was lost. And so this often creates what a lot of fat activists call yo-yo dieting, where you slim down a little bit and then, you plateau, you gain the weight, and then you say, okay, I'm gonna try it again, and you slowly slim down a little bit, and you're like, and it's like this constant, hamster on a wheel cycle that actually contributes to a lot of the health issues, like heart issues, cardiovascular issues that are generally associated with being fat. Is actually often more so linked to the cycle of yo-yo dieting, which fat folks are told that is good for us because for some strange reason, I don't know. So there are no federal laws that protect fat folks from discrimination in housing, employment, medical care, education. There's only one state, Michigan, and 6 U.S. cities that have laws that explicitly protect fat folks from discrimination in various areas of life. So you can not be hired because you're fat, and there's not really much you can do about it except complain on Facebook. Rates of discrimination against fat people are on par with rates of racial discrimination in the US. And we know that the United States is a colonial nation that was founded on white supremacy. And so to have numbers that are actually showing that, hey, this is actually like a really substantial issue, it's something that we should be talking about the way we talk about race, and I'm speaking as a Black fat person, is really important. It's really, really important that we understand also the connections between body size and racial discrimination and how those two things intersect. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to go through all of it, but yes. There's lots of writing online that you can find by Black, Indigenous, and POC fat writers, fat activists. And fat people earn up to 6% less, sorry for the typo, in the workplace than thin counterparts. We are less likely to be hired and less likely to be promoted when we are hired. And so we make less money and we struggle to eat the healthy food that we're supposed to be eating to get thin, and all of these other issues that I wish I had the time to go through. Yay! So I mentioned Jessamine Stanley earlier, and I found this quote during my research when I first put this together that I thought was like really, really important. Anyone can be fit. Weight doesn't discriminate. And this is a quote by Richard Weil, who is the director of the New York Obesity Research Center and Weight Loss Program at Mount Sinai at St. Luke's Hospital in New York. And what really gets me about this quote is the fact that, there are a lot of, weight-focused, weight-centric doctors, health professionals, scientists who understand the nuances of weight, of body size, of health and fitness, but still continue to perpetuate, the ideas and myths and things like that that directly harm fat folks. And so I have pictures up here of some somewhat famous, kind of famous fat folks who are fit. Reagan Chastain, who runs the blog Dances with Fat. She's totally awesome. Cheryl Hayworth, who is a power lifter. And Jessamine Stanley, who I mentioned earlier and is one of my many crushes, who is a Black yoga instructor, and they're all awesome fat folks that you should follow if you can find them on various social media. But, and for those of you who may not get it, there's this, a GIF of people that are shaking their butts as they dance. The important thing to remember is, despite all the Jessamine Stanleys and, the Cheryl Hayworths and the Reagan Chastains, at the end of the day, fat people don't have to perform a certain type of fatness in order to be worthy of dignity and respect and adequate health care. We don't have to, fat people who love salads and berries and seeds and stuff like that, who can climb stairs without being out of breath, should never be the face of our movement. Because we are legion and we are very diverse, obviously in many different ways. And what matters the most is, is that we're treated and looked at as human beings who have full lives and who don't, fit into cookie cutter ideas of what you think a fat person is or should be. So, it's really important that we also, when we talk about these issues, talk about how to include fat people. So we talk about, a lot of the issues that we face, how they affect our day-to-day lives, from our mental health to hiring, and employment and therefore money. And we know that disabled folks also have a lot of, we're poor, basically. Many of us are very poor. And so when you talk about the intersections of health and weight and disability, I mean, they literally go together like peanut butter and jelly. This has been my experience as a multiply disabled fat person, that when we talk both about ableism and fat antagonism, and then we talk about fat liberation and disability justice, that the experiences are so intertwined, because just the very fact of being fat, your focus is on a person's health. Society's focus is on our supposed health, is focused on ideas about what makes a person healthy or not. And these are obviously things that folks who are disabled also deal with on a daily basis. And so when we're talking about how to include fat people, accessibility, like it is for disabled folks, is very important. So when you're doing events or what have you, organizing things, thinking about the size of the chairs that you're using, thinking about alternatives to chairs, thinking about, stall sizes, which is also obviously an issue for wheelchair users, ADA compliant bathrooms sometimes they're so-called ADA compliant, but not really. But that stuff matters for fat people too. There have been times when I've had to go to the bathroom and I'm like trying to squeeze in and I'm trying to turn around and it's ridiculous. And as well as obviously door widths. Obviously a big one is hiring and pay. If you're a person with that kind of power, to make sure that not everyone on your board or whatever is thin or slim or what some black folks call slim thick. And making sure that the visibility in the campaigns and things that we do are inclusive of all fat people, whether it's race, disability, obviously, and even body size and shape. A lot of the campaigns that you see that so-called include fat people tend to include fat people with a certain type of shape, tend to include fat people that are below a certain size, really super fat folks don't tend to get seen. So it's really important that we're thinking about all these things, including language and history. A lot of people don't realize that, like I said earlier, fat liberation movement, body positivity has history, and we're not being taught that history. We don't know that history until we come to events like this, if we're able to access events like this at all. And when we lose that history, we lose a lot of what's going on in the present and what's at stake. So this is a page of people you can literally just follow. Obviously you can follow me. I'm not on here because I'm here with you today, so I can just tell you who I am. On Twitter, Instagram, Twitter and Instagram, I am at the @ Writers, WRITERS, Delight, DELITE. And on Facebook, you can find me at facebook.com/Writers Delight. And you can also follow my personal Facebook page. Most of my posts are public posts. And my legal name is Denarii Monroe. Denarii Grace is my professional name. And these are some of the list of folks you can follow. Virgie Tovar, Melissa Fabello, Your Fat Friend is on Twitter, Fat Women of Color on Instagram, Ashley Shackelford, who I know personally and is amazing and awesome, and is a fellow fat black non-binary person, and also queer. And like I said, if you would like access to this list or to the presentation as a whole, please send me an email or contact me, talk to me after this. We can talk about how to get you this information. And normally I would play a trailer. I'm checking the time. I'm late. Of course I'm late. A trailer for Fatitude, which is a really, really great and important documentary that came out last year. The trailer does not have captions, so if you would like to view the trailer but need captions for any reason, please let me know and I can type up captions for you, and it'll be in a Google Doc which I can share, and the link will be shareable so you can share it with other people as well. But the trailer itself and the film is really important. I know one of the directors personally, so in terms of accessibility, if you would like to screen this film at your school, your organization, or what have you, I can put you in touch with them, and again, can help address your concerns around accessibility to view the film. And that is pretty much it. You can clap. Normally, I know someone in the back mentioned that this was really intense, the exercise that we did earlier. And so normally what I would do after that exercise is to do a short little 5-minute meditation. I know that the next thing downstairs starts in about 10 minutes.
4:15, about 10 minutes.
Yes. So if anyone would like to stay and do a short meditation, just to this was like really intense and this was a lot of information, and for some of us, it brings up a lot of trauma and things like that. So if you would like to stay to do that short meditation, that would be awesome. I apologize, I could not do it earlier, but I was trying to get through everything, and so I saved this for last. But again, I understand if you have to leave. If you want to stick around to talk to me after, cool. But thank you so much for coming. I was very nervous, and I'm really glad to be here. Yay, disability.